Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the CUAHSI Cyberseminar. My name is Lauren, and I'll be your coordinator for today. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. We will be conducting a question and answer session towards the end of this conference, at which time you may press star 1 for questions. If at any time during the call you require assistance, please press star 0, and a coordinator will be happy to assist you. I'd now like to turn the presentation over to your host for today's call, Mr. John Duncan, Project Manager.
Thanks, Lauren, and welcome everyone to the final cyber seminar of this fall series given by Sivapalan. I'm glad you all could make it. For those of you who are new to this, I just wanted to quickly go over some of this cyber seminar interface through WebEx. It's pretty self-explanatory, but the participants list is up in the upper right-hand side, the chat box on the lower right. You can address messages to all participants or to individuals by selecting someone in that drop-down menu. At the end of the call, when we turn this over for Q&A, you can also, in addition to asking audio questions, ask them via the chat box. If you have any problems, you can send those to me by addressing that chat to the host. And if you have any major problems with WebEx, you can download this presentation online from the CUAHSI website and just listen in on the phone. As always, we're eager to get feedback on this series, and so that can be addressed to us at CUAHSI by sending an email to commanager@cuahsi.org. I just wanted to quickly plug some upcoming CUAHSI activities, given that this is the last cyber seminar of the semester. December 3rd, which is a Monday, is the CUAHSI annual membership meeting teleconference. For those of you who are CUAHSI representatives, you should have received some emails and the official notice via U.S. mail on that. And then to everyone, on December 11th, which is a Tuesday, CUAHSI is having a reception at the fall HU. All are welcome, especially graduate students. There's going to be free drinks and food, and that's in the Moscone Center in room 300, and it starts at 6 p.m. You can also stop by the CUAHSI booth to get more info on CUAHSI activities at the fall HU. With that said, I would like to introduce today's speaker, Murugesu Sivapalan, who is a professor in the Department of Geography and in Civil and Environmental Engineering at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Professor Sivapalan received his bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the University of Ceylon, his master's of engineering from the Asian Institute of Technology, and his MA and PhD from Princeton University. In addition to his many awards, Siva has been elected a Fellow of the American Geophysical Union, the European Geophysical Union, and the Australian Academy of Technological Sciences and Engineering. He is currently the executive editor of Hydrology and Earth System Sciences Journal of EGU, and he's published over 100 peer-reviewed articles. He's also currently the PI of a National Science Foundation grant to explore hydrologic synthesis, about which he will be speaking today. Siva, thanks so much for being with us and offering to give this talk, and you should have control of the presentation at this point.
Okay, thank you very much, John, and I also want to thank CUAHSI for giving me this opportunity to give this talk. I'm really grateful also to the community and to NSF for giving me the opportunity to lead this initiative, really on behalf of the community itself. So let me start. I am nominally the lead PI of this NSF-funded project on hydrologic synthesis. One half of 2 projects that they funded, the other half being the effort led by Charlie Borasmati and the but on the other hand, I feel like really only a spokesperson at the moment, and I'm building on the efforts of so many people that are working with us on this project. Our project has 2 objectives, and I will talk about the first objective now and come back to the second one later. Essentially, the idea here is work towards improved predictability of water cycle dynamics in a changing environment. Every word in that last line is improved predictability of water cycle dynamics in a changing environment. Now, let's talk about predictability and limits to predictability in a traditional way. The traditional view is one where we look at the world as this person on the pedestal looks at the world in terms of the classical limits of predictability. System identification, what are the correct boundary conditions, what are the driving forces, initial conditions, and then translation of our understanding of how nature works into some kind of a perceptual model of the system, and then converting that perceptual model into a mathematical representation that we can incorporate into a computer and then start making predictive statements. That's a traditional view, and even the traditional view is constrained by the fact that we can only see so much about the system that we are trying to model today. We can see what is on the ground, we cannot see what's below the ground, and what's below the ground we have to make a lot of inferences, make a lot of assumptions about what's going on below the ground, and that is what leads to a lot of the predictability problems, even in the traditional approach to predictions. Now, introducing to this makes change. When you're dealing with a changing environment, especially changes brought about by human actions, increased carbon dioxide, rising temperatures, land clearing, urbanization, things like that. Once you put change into the mix, once you embrace change, then everything changes. We cannot look at the world as consisting of certain things that are fixed and certain things that are changing, because everything changes. The only difference is that some things change at a slow rate, some things change at a faster rate. So we might want to look at things that change slowly as being structure, relatively stable, relatively fixed, and things that change fast, we can think of them as responses. But really, strictly speaking, when you now need to embrace change, and especially fast changes that are brought about by human impacts, then I think that we have to look at both of these changes, both structure and response. That given the structure, you can predict the responses based on physical mechanisms that are applicable. But then the responses themselves feed back on structure. It's through the responses that happen over time that structure forms and that structure evolves. So we have to deal with both the physical mechanisms and evolutionary mechanisms if you want to make predictions in a changing environment. So in other words, so the way that we observe, the way that we predict the future has to be balanced between the traditional mechanistic perspective of matter and forces and boundary value problems and patterns and processes, and looking at them from an evolutionary perspective. And the question is, could there be a broadening of those two perspectives, of our perspectives? Could there be a synthesis between the mechanistic and the evolutionary perspective? So this is what is fundamentally different in the present world. So let's look at the water cycle dynamics. That we traditionally we are used to looking at the world, water cycle, and the hydrosphere in terms of physical systems, biogeochemical systems, and ecological systems, where water plays an important part in interconnecting these things. But now we introduce human systems, and so if you want to start making predictions of water cycle variability in this changing world, we need to look at all of these things together. And so when you put them all together, water becomes the lifeblood of these interconnected processes. Biogeochemical processes, ecological processes, energy cycle processes, they're all interconnected. It's almost like a tangled web of water, earth, and biota. Makes it much harder compared to what we have been used to in the past. This is an example here of this tangled web of water and energy processes and carbon and nutrient processes all interconnected. Imagine that you have some processes which are fast, and some processes which are slow, and the mix of fast processes and slow processes is what leads to this tangled web that I mentioned earlier. So that's interaction between processes. Now introduce motions into this mix. That that water begins to move and things move with it. And then once you have motion, you have then connections and interaction between places. That something happens here, impacts on something happens somewhere else. So you have remote impacts and global teleconnections. You have cycles of various cycles and cycles within cycles. So you have interaction of places, and then you introduce scale hierarchy into this mix. Then you have interactions across scales, small scale processes embedded within and then contributing to larger scale processes and vice versa. So basically what you have is interactions across processes, interactions across scales, interactions across places, basically leading to patterns that emerge at all scales. So this is an example of a river network that has formed itself within this is a peat swamp in Sarawak, Borneo in Malaysia, that is, as we see it, is constantly in motion, constantly evolving. And you introduce flow processes and soil forming and erosional processes together, leading to soil catena. You have flow processes and erosional processes and ecological processes, leading to vegetation patterns that appear differently in different places depending on the climate and the underlying geology and underlying topography. So essentially you have patterns and more patterns. And for every pattern that we are able to see on the landscape, there are more patterns that we cannot see. Doesn't mean that they don't exist, but we cannot see them with our naked eye. So this is the example of preferential pathways in soils. Or you can even talk about layered soils, certification, and which have all been formed through evolutionary processes. And so these are patterns that we see in space. For every pattern that you see in space, you also see patterns in time, except that we don't normally see them all because of poor measurements, of revolution of our measurements. But they do exist, and the patterns in time are connected to patterns in space as well. So, and then on top of it all, you introduce human impacts on the landscape, and humans in the form of houses and roads and dams and cities and large-scale transfers of water. So the moment they introduce them, they leave their impact on the landscape in terms of patterns that emerge. So basically patterns, and the question is, can we benefit from these patterns whenever they exist? So the working hypothesis that underpin our project is that we can make improved predictions of water cycle dynamics if you can understand and learn from the patterns that exist. So patterns basically help us to reduce the complexity through reduced dimensionality. Patterns also, as I mentioned earlier, these patterns, both observed and unobserved, are all emergent properties arising out of complex interactions and feedbacks. So whenever we study patterns, whenever we see patterns, we can always expect that we can actually learn a lot from these patterns in terms of how things have evolved and how things will evolve in the future. So our study is focused on patterns, how to describe them, why they emerge, and what's their impact on the overall response. And so that's basically the idea behind our proposal. And so the study of these observed patterns, the other advantage is that we know that things are changing in the future, but yet, if you understand the patterns that exist that have evolved over time in the past, we can actually learn something from that and then apply that to make predictions in the future. So the observed patterns, wherever they exist, can help us to predict the future as well. So our proposal, our project is underpinned by top-down questions in terms of pattern description, measurement, and identification. Theoretical questions, which are deep, why-type questions. Why does the patterns emerge? Under what circumstances can we expect it to occur? And what are the underlying rules? And then bottom-up questions. What are the consequences of these patterns for things that we want to predict, processes that we want to predict? How does the understanding of the underlying function help us to make predictions? And then you have to also understand that, the moment you put humans into this, how does the human activity interact with these patterns? How how do the human interactions change the patterns? So that's basically the bottom line, the philosophy behind our project. So if you want to study patterns, and I gave you quite a few examples of these patterns, if you want to study these patterns, really you have to look at them from different perspectives, from using different concepts, different data sets, different methods arising from different disciplines. So that itself is synthesis. Synthesis basically from this definition means people from different backgrounds and experiences coming together to study a common question, or for example a pattern, or a prediction problem, and help each other to generate increased understanding that will lead to improvement. Now, I just want to mention the second objective of this proposal of the project, which is actually bring about synthesis itself. In other words, predictability is the goal, but synthesis itself is the goal. In other words, we want to use this opportunity of the project to adopt, to try out different synthesis modes of synthesis, see which way to go, to advance synthesis. So the idea is that we want to also use this project as a test of hypothesis. That the hypothesis is that if you bring people together with a wide range of experiences and interests, you combine complementary expertise from multiple disciplines. We motivate these people with challenging problems that focus on clear targets, and underpin these activities by common and unifying themes. The hypothesis is that it will lead to self-organized, sustained interactions to produce transformational outcomes. That's the hypothesis that we want to test out as well, out of this project. So we have basically brought together a group of people. Latest count, we have about 30 people brought together from all over this country, and as this picture shows, and also from Europe and Australia and China. And these 30 scientists, I'm the oldest one, by the way, and they come from many different disciplines. In fact, more than 50% of them would not consider themselves as hydrologists. So really, it's a highly interdisciplinary mix of scientists who have a lot of enthusiasm and ideas to contribute to these problems. So how do we do it? That's all very abstract. How do we go from there, from these basic principles that we want to learn from patterns? So basically, what we have come up with, what we have done is using, putting the ideas from the community, from the synthesis team itself. Basically, we have identified what we call 5 nucleation sites. These are concentrated areas where people have a lot of interest in. And we basically, on the basis of these projects, we have actually brought together this synthesis team. And these are the titles of these things, so starting from hydromorphology, human nature interactions and adaptations, led by Usman Lal, interactions between hydrosphere and biosphere, a project led by Praveen Kumar, multi-scale interactions of landscape processes within intensively managed watersheds, led by myself, evolution, structure, and function of hydrological hillslopes, and then finally stochastic transport and scaling in air surface processes, which is led by Rina Schumer and Epic Fola Georgia. So if you see here, these cover a wide variety of areas and also scales, going from global scale to regional scale to watershed scale to hillslope scale. So I think there's enough interest, enough value in every one of these things to sustain interesting research activities. Nevertheless, every one of these projects have, and all of them are underpinned by unifying themes, and I have mentioned these things here. So there are unifying themes, there are clear targets that we have set for each of these projects, and we hope that this will actually lead to complete outcomes. So the way that we operate, we just had a synthesis kickoff meeting in September where almost the entire synthesis team came together, brainstormed on these projects, and then formed into what we call activity groups, smaller groups that will focus on each of these projects, and then over the next 12 months, these small groups will meet separately in different places to brainstorm and set goals and work together into outcomes that they have set themselves. So it's a very grassroots type of activity. So at the end of 1 year, the entire team will come back together, meet together, and then present and then redefine their problems and go back again. So this cycle will continue. So that's what we have done. That's the philosophy of what we are doing. So in the remaining 20 minutes or so, what I would like to do, having given you an overview of what we are trying to do, take some time, 5 minutes each for each of these projects, and give you a gist of what these projects are trying to do. So I'll start with project number 5. Let me see. So this is a project on stochastic transport and emergent scaling in earth surface processes. It's really a joint effort between the MSED, located in Minnesota, our synthesis activity, and the Desert Research Institute in Nevada, and it's led by Rena Schumer in Georgia. Now, let me explain a little bit about this project, because I just came back from a meeting they organized last week in Nevada in Lake Tahoe, and really I came back with a lot of enthusiasm and excitement coming out of this project. Let me explain what it is. So, scale invariance is something that has been observed in surface morphology. If you look at surface topography, river network structure, or braided river channel organization, they all exhibit scale invariance. The question is, where does this scale invariance come from? Does it arise from the underlying processes, the evolutionary process that I talked about earlier, that contribute to the generation of these morphologies, sediment transport, landscape evolution processes, and so on? So the question is, where does it come from, and what does it lead to? So if you have scale invariance, what kind of responses can we expect in the presence of these scale invariants? So the project has brought together earth surface modelers, especially geomorphologists, hydrologists, mathematicians who work a lot on heavy tail distribution, and physicists. Basically, the idea is that whenever there is scale invariance, the question is asked, as I mentioned earlier, where does it come from? And what I've been told, I'm not an expert in this area, that whenever processes are governed by discrete events, hotspots and hot moments, then classical stochastic theories do not work, and classical governing equations like pitch flow and Rufinus equation and so on need to be generalized, and leading to what I call heavy tail distribution and fractional derivatives to replace traditional derivatives like first derivatives, second derivatives. This is something that I learned really excited about. So this project brings together mathematicians and physicists and groundwater hydrologists and surface hydrologists who have a lot to gain from these basic advances in physics and mathematics. And the questions that they look at go to the heart of our synthesis activity. In other words, questions are like, what is predictability? What are the limits to predictability? Limits of predictability. And so I mentioned about heavy tail distributions. So the working group that has come together under this umbrella has organized itself around a number of group goals. For example, can Earth surface models scale dependent be eliminated by generalizing to heavy tail stochastic models? Are existing stochastic models useful anymore? Do we need to develop new equations governing these new stochastic processes, especially that are underpinned by Charman fractions derivatives? And can the statistical properties observed in Earth surface structure be used to estimate parameters in process models? So these are the goals of the working group. And as I mentioned, we had the first workshop in Lake Tahoe in Nevada, and it was really an exciting meeting where the experts from various disciplines presented the problems that they have currently, for example, in sediment transport predictions or hydrological predictions. And then there were short courses on fractional calculus and heavy tail stochastic processes, and really it was a coming together of these people, and we came out of these meetings with a lot of excitement. And already people are forming groups within this larger group, going out and doing something. So I find that this kind of activity, this new area of fractional calculus, fractional scaling, can contribute a lot to hydrology, but especially the problem of predictability. So I'm hoping for really exciting results over the next year or two. Okay. Let me go to the next project, Project 4, which is led by Peter Trotz from the University of Arizona. And Peter is leading an effort on the evolution and function of subsurface structure, specifically at the hillslope scale. In other words, questions such as what combinations of hydrological, biogeochemical, pedological, geomorphological, and ecological processes lead to subsurface structure. Remember, I told you at the beginning of the lecture that we can see something on the ground and we can make inferences, but a lot of the processes that we study in hydrology are governed by subsurface structure, and which we cannot see. And so it's always interesting and important to understand where the structure comes from. And so this combination of various disciplines, hydrology, biogeochemistry, pedology, geomorphology, and ecology, and so on, contributed to an understanding of how subsurface structure evolved, what are the underlying principles of the evolution, and how we can use that structure for making predictions. So this is what this project team is working at. I think this is an example. These are examples that I took from Jeff McDonald. Network structure, network behavior occurs at all scales, going from 0.01 meter to 10,000 meters. So the structure, network-like behavior at all scales. And the question is, what do we know about these things? What can we learn about these things? How can we use these understandings to make predictions? That's what this project is. So this is an example of how hillslope hydrology, the flow through the hillslope, contributes to spatial distribution of plants, microbes inside the hillslope, and how they contribute to patterns of biogeoweathering, and how they contribute to connectivity, subsurface connectivity, and then how it all contributes to hydrology and the flow pathways. This cycle is something that this group wants to study, and because it will eventually lead to much more improved understanding of network structures and how they come about, because it can lead to also predictions. So learning about these interactions can also help us to understand soil-landscape relationships and vegetation-landscape relationships. So they are all fundamentally affected by these interaction processes. So the group research is going to be underpinned by fundamental research questions that address that are connected to connectivity, how patterns emerge, what we can learn about these patterns, fundamental understanding of these patterns, and how we can use them. So, in order to study these things, the group has come together and come up with a very neat idea. Essentially, they are going to, as University of Arizona has taken control of the Biosphere 2 that's located near Tucson, and the group that is leading this project is also involved in running the new Biosphere 2 in Arizona, and they're going to use this dome experiment for set up an experimental biome where they're going to set up 3 hillslopes inside the dome, and they're going to be designing these hillslopes in such a way that you can answer fundamental questions about how network structure evolves over time. So these are some schematics of what they're thinking about this, but it's still early days, and we really, from a synthesis perspective, we are making a contribution to this effort. So there's a lot more activity going on in this project, but the important thing is that the synthesis process is contributing ideas to this, especially in the early stages of the design of these systems. In other words, the design of these systems inside the dome represents a synthesis activity that brings together hydrologists, biogeochemists, pedologists, and geomorphologists and ecologists together. What are the hypotheses that we're going to test in this experiment? How do we set up this? What geometry do we set up? What kind of climate do we set up? And what can we learn from this? So this activity is going to be going on for many, many years, but from the synthesis perspective, the design of this, which is going to take some time over the next, let's say, year or so, the design itself is a synthesis activity. And the group has planned a number of activities over the next 3-4 years as part of the synthesis activity. They start the meeting next week, which I'm attending, in the biosphere too, and then move on to other famous hillslope places, and learn from the local experiences, and learn from the local behavior that is observed, and as a way of enriching the design, as a way of getting feedback for the design. So this is really an exciting activity that the group is leading. Let me go to project number 3, which I am leading at the moment, which is at the watershed scale, multi-scale interactions of landscape processes within intensively managed watersheds. So this project hasn't started really. We have some ideas, we have formed a team, but we haven't really met. But this project addresses a fundamental question that is in our Straw.man. How do interacting mass fluxes of water, sediment, nutrients, carbon, as well as microbiota and macrobiota throughout watersheds respond to various perturbations of the watershed system, weather events, climate change, land use change, and other impacts. And one of the fundamental difficulties in dealing with all these interacting processes at the watershed scale is that we don't really have appropriate data. And so immediately the question arises, we want to set up a hydrological observatory. There has been a lot of efforts in thinking about setting up hydrological observatories in the Midwest of this country. That's where we have a number of intensively managed watersheds. So the question is, what do we go and measure? What do we measure? How do we measure? What are the key things? So this project is focused on that question. In other words, can we use the design of a potential observatory as a focus for synthesis activity? So we can think about linking scale and process here. That in a large watershed you have a number of scales. There is a hierarchy going from the continental to regional to channels, benthic, interfacial scales, and cellular, and processes that happen at every scale are all interconnected. And there are also interactions between processes, between geological, hydrological, biological, and chemical processes. So this whole project is focused on linking scale and process across all of these disciplines. So that's the bottom line. And so what we want to do is to address this scale linkage problem. Going from the plot scale to hillslope scale to small basins and large basins, the idea of transferring knowledge between one scale and another scale, that fundamental scale problem, is what we will be studying in the context of all these interacting processes. So the goal so far is to get a number of people together that bring a lot of disciplines that are impinging on this problem and create a kind of theoretical predictive framework to address this question. And the first step to do this, and that's what we want to do whenever as soon as we meet, is to develop a conceptual model of these interacting processes with the relevant time and space fields. And then take those conceptual ideas and put them into some kind of a screening model, or conceptual model that we can use to make predictions, not only make predictions, but also to generate new hypotheses that we can go out and test. Because any observatory that we want to develop has to be underpinned by fundamental hypotheses, and this modeling framework can be a way to generate these hypotheses. And I'm just mentioning some of the basic components of this modeling framework that we are thinking about. First of all, it's going to be watershed focused. It's going to be event-based, and it's going to be amenable to scaling analysis. It's going to capture problems of connectivity and transmission, and clearly it has to incorporate human interferences as a fundamental process, because we are dealing with intensively managed landscapes. So that's along the lines of what we are talking about. We still haven't met. Now, how are we going to do this? Now, this is my personal perspective. I have actually been particularly involved in a study involving sediment transport in large landscapes, and essentially we look at the problem of sediment delivery ratio, and there have been patterns of sediment delivery ratio as a function of scale, as a function of capture size, and we use very simple models based on buckets of attention that help us to understand where these patterns came from, where these scaling behavior came from, and gave us a lot of enthusiasm. It gave us a lot of ideas and hope that something along those lines, some feeding model that uses simple tools, simple concepts to generate patterns that can be the basis for hypothesis testing. But wherever there is data, like in the case of sediments, we can actually test these hypotheses on the data. So this is an idea that I have, but I would like to communicate to the rest of my group and see whether we can extend this idea of these simple steering models to incorporate other processes, ecological processes, and biogeochemical processes as well. And so this is something that we are doing. We will be doing. So that's project number 3, and we hope to meet early next year to start planning this. Let me now next go to project number 2, which is led by Praveen Kumar. He has actually been articulating this idea of hydrosphere-biosphere interactions in a number of his papers and his works. Now, hydrosphere-biosphere interactions do exist in even the other projects that I mentioned before, but they come together even more explicitly in the project that Praveen is leading. Now, why do we need to do this? Because really, as the human influence increases in terms of alteration of vegetation patterns, elevated carbon dioxide, increase in temperature, alteration of nutrient cycles, change in the groundwater table, changes to the variability of the water and energy cycles, all of these things. Whenever these things happen, we cannot treat the biosphere in our hydrological predictive tools as fixed items. We have to think of them as evolving. And so the idea that natural, which I mentioned already before, that natural systems don't just exist as fixed things that we solve boundary value problems on, but they actually evolve. That the evolution of these systems are driven by both exogenous variability, imposed by weather and climate, and anthropogenic factors, and endogenous variability generated by the subsystems themselves as a result of adaptive processes. So the variability that we're talking about allows the system to explore a variety of states and to find the most optimal for each substance. And this is something that we have to address when we're looking at hydrosphere-biosphere interaction. So the response of the system combined with the evolution of the system. So in other words, response and structure combined together to produce emergent patterns. And so the study of emergent patterns in the context of hydrosphere-biosphere interaction is a very important thing. So when we are studying this, the fundamental questions underpin this is both the hydrological control on the biology and the biological control on the hydrology. Both are important, evolution and response. And so long time scale processes or fast processes and slow processes, they interact together to produce these patterns. So I won't go to the details of this. There are challenges in dealing with both the hydrological control on the biology and the biological control of the hydrology. So there are challenges and there are approaches that this group will pursue. So I'll go quickly past that. So in the synthesis kickoff meeting that we had in September, they came together and discussed this and brainstormed and basically came up on 4 different topics that they found exciting. So, for example, causes and consequences, complexity in eco-hydrological systems, carbon, nutrient, water cycle interactions, using emergent patterns to constrain predictive uncertainty, and interactions of microbial lifestyle within the water cycle. These are 4 topics that they found exciting, that at least amongst that group, and they have number of plans that they want to do over the next year. So you have to wait and see how things go over the next 6 months to 12 months. So some of the products will be in the form of papers, in the form of review papers, in the form of actual research work. So every group will decide how, in what way they can best achieve their objectives. It's really what they do and how they do it is actually completely up to the individual groups. There's nothing coming from the top. So it's really self-organized, grassroots kind of activity. So let me finish up with project 1, which is led by Utmanulal. The focuses on hydromorphology, especially human-nature interaction and adaptation, human adaptations especially. And so this whole area is, is creating a new science in itself, of a science of hydrologic change. And this project has been started, and we hope that it will start in the second year. But the fundamental issues that are involved in hydromorphology are the same, interacting processes leading to patterns that emerge, and what we can learn from these patterns. That's the name of the game. Okay, so that basically brings to an end my presentation. I think I have been very broad brush in my presentation because we've been in operation only about 6 months, and things are still evolving. But I'm really quite excited about what is possible from this group of people working together. There's a lot of excitement, and really time will tell. I'm really hopeful that over the next 6 to 12 months we can already begin to present to you some really new results. So if you want more information, or if you want to contribute to our synthesis activity, please go and visit this website here at the University of Illinois. I also want, if you are going to the AGU meeting in December, we have a special session on synthesis convened by Praveen Kumar, Peter Thorpe, and Steve Tolkien, which happens on Wednesday. In fact, it's a whole day affair next month. And I want to finish up with acknowledgements. I want to thank my co-PIs and project leaders, members of the synthesis team, and also foreign affiliates. I think NSF, I want to thank especially NSF and CUAHSI for providing support. Same thing for UIUC here, has just provided additional support. And then I want to thank Rick Cooper of CUAHSI for moral support, and Shane City here at the University of Illinois for providing website support. So thank you very much, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Well, Siva, thanks so much for a very interesting talk. And Lauren, I guess at this point we'll open up the phone lines.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you wish to ask a question, please press star 1. If your question has been answered or you wish to withdraw your question, press star 2. Please press star 1 to begin.
And you could also type it in the chat box, and I can help moderate it there with Lauren. So Siva, there's a lot of interesting things going on, and as you mentioned, this has all just begun. What are some of the next short-term steps for all of these different projects?
Well, I think in the short term, there are a number of activities already happening, but essentially the groups, the broader group, the 5 groups, they will meet separately. We have funding, we have support for them to meet periodically over the next 6 to 12 months. So really it's up to them. They will start organizing meetings where they will come together and brainstorm a number of different ways and identify topics that they find interesting, and then they will work together to produce in the short term. They could produce papers, they could produce review papers, they could take a bunch of data and analyze a number of things that are possible. So it's really up to the individual groups and individual activity groups in terms of what they will do. But broadly speaking, all we are doing is actually facilitating the groups to come together at various places to work together. And once they come together, brainstorm and identify things that excite them, then they will go back and they work remotely through the cyber collaboratory and so on that they have set up. So it's an ongoing process. What the synthesis activity that is providing is really a facilitating role. We provide guidelines. We have a broader framework, but ultimately the work will be done by individuals and groups, small groups.
So with a nod towards GBC's question, I guess I should also mention that everything that you just discussed on this very fascinating multi-faceted project is one of 2 synthesis activities for hydrology and earth system superficial science that's recently been funded. The other one is centered out of University of New Hampshire with Charles Horace-Marty, and Steve Frolking. And thanks for pointing out that that series is going to be going on at Fall HU on Wednesday, where both groups are going to be hosting and having presentations. So with that in mind, I think that's folks at British Columbia are asking what's the long-term timeline?
Yeah. Well, the long-term timeline, let me say that this is a 4-year funded project, and these projects will go in cycles, like I mentioned earlier, that we have annual meetings of the entire synthesis team, and then we have smaller meetings, various places, where actual work will happen, and then come back together. So this is an annual cycle, focusing on various aspects that contribute to predictability. So remember, the predictability and synthesis are the long-term goals. In other words, we want to bring about both predictability, improved predictability, and we want to bring about synthesis. Both are important. And the long-term goal, in the case of predictability, is something that I've articulated in the Straw.man. At the end of 4 years, we would like to be able to produce a document. First of all, there's another one. At the end of 3 years, for example, we want to actually have something like a Chapman conference, where all of the work that has been done over the 4 years will be presented. Then we can evaluate what has been achieved as part of the synthesis. That's one. But another goal, if we can achieve it, is to actually organize the writing up of a document. It can be a report, it can be a book, which summarizes the advances that have been made in terms of predictability that have been achieved as part of the project. So these are more concrete outcomes that there'll be a large conference on the synthesis, something like a Chapman conference, around about 2009 or 2010. That's number one. Number two, that we would like to be able to put together a document in the form of a special issue or in the form of a book that summarizes the advances, improvements that have been made in terms of predictability.
Great. Lauren, any questions on the phone line?
No, there are currently no questions.
Okay. So Siva, just a quick follow-up to that with documenting advances to predictability. Are you aware of any activities either under the auspices of these synthesis activities or elsewhere documenting or kind of benchmarking where we are now? Or is that going to be?
Right. Yeah, well, I know of another one which is just starting, the Riches in Ungate-based initiative that Gunther Bloschel is leading now. An IA International Association of Hydrological Sciences initiative that started in 2002. Now, I led that early first 3 years, and then Jeff McDonald led it next 2 years, and Gunther Bloschel has taken over leadership of that initiative. Now, his goal, he has identified his objective over the next 2 years of his chairmanship to produce an IPCC-style report that is going to be a book published by Cambridge University Press on our current state-of-the-art on predictability. Now, that project, of course, is focused on watersheds or basins. In other words, predictions in ungate basins. So, what can we do now? So, that's an activity that Gunther is going to lead, and clearly, what he's going to do is going to overlap with what we're going to do as part of this activity over almost the same time period.
Okay, so we're getting close to the top of the hour. Last chance for questions for Siva. Siva, you'll also be around at Fall HU for any folks who are there. Well, again, thanks for a very interesting talk.
Thanks very much.
On behalf of the community, we're all looking very forward to seeing what these different groups can do. And certainly onto some very intriguing things.
Yep. Okay.
Lauren, last chance. Anyone there?
No questions.
Okay. Siva, really thanks to you and all the members of your team. Thanks to everyone for participating today. We'll see the CUAHSI representatives on December 3rd for the annual membership meeting teleconference, and hopefully we'll see all of you at the CUAHSI reception Tuesday night at AGU. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you very much.
And thank you for your participation in today's conference. This concludes the presentation, and you may now disconnect. Good day.